I'm Adam, 31, and if you had told me 2 years ago that my family would one day show up at my door screaming like I had personally ruined their lives, I probably would have laughed it off. But here we are. For context, I've always been the responsible one in the family, the guy who paid his bills on time, saved up for a down payment, and actually thought about things like health insurance before turning 30. My younger brother, Josh, is the opposite. At 27, he still acts like the world is supposed to bend around him. My parents have always coddled him, brushing off his choices with, "He's just finding himself." Which would be fine if finding himself didn't involve hopping between jobs, blowing his paychecks on impulsive purchases, and then landing back at their house when rent was due. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when last week, Josh called me sounding weirdly calm, almost smug, and dropped the line that started all this. "I quit my job. You're paying my rent now." I genuinely thought he was joking. Like, there had to be a punchline coming, right? But no, he doubled down. He said it like it was some royal decree, like I should be honored to have the chance to sponsor his mental health break. I laughed, not the kind of laugh you give when something's funny, but the sharp, incredulous kind, and said, "Then starve." That's when the storm started brewing. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "Help him or you're cut off." No, how are you? No attempt to ask if I could even afford it, just a demand. I stared at my screen for a solid minute, feeling my jaw tighten. Because here's the thing, I have helped before. Countless times. I co-signed Josh's first apartment. I spotted him for his car payment last summer when he blew his cash on a music festival. I've been the family's emergency wallet more times than I can count, and each time I told myself it was just one last time. Something in me snapped that night. Maybe it was the entitled tone in Mom's text. Maybe it was the memory of all the late nights I worked overtime to keep my own life afloat while everyone acted like Josh's bad decisions were my responsibility. Either way, I made a decision. I opened my banking app, transferred my share out of every joint account we still had with the family, and moved it into a brand new account with just my name on it. I didn't say a word to anyone. By morning, my phone was blowing up with calls and texts, each one more frantic than the last. And then came the pounding on my front door. When I opened it, there they all were, my parents, Josh, even my aunt for some reason, faces red, voices already raised. And that's where this whole nightmare really began. When I opened the door that morning, the first thing I heard wasn't hello, or even a reasonable question. It was Dad barking, "What do you think you're doing?" No warm-up, no calm conversation, just straight into interrogation mode like I was a teenager who'd stolen the car keys. Josh was behind him, arms crossed, looking smug despite being the one whose rent was due in 3 days. Mom stood there with that mix of disappointment and passive aggression she's mastered over the years, like she was starring in a soap opera where I had betrayed the family honor. I stepped aside and let them in because I didn't feel like having this conversation in front of my neighbors. But as soon as the door shut, Dad turned on me. "Why would you empty the accounts? Do you have any idea what position you just put us in?" I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, I do. I put myself in a position where I don't get drained every time someone decides to make a reckless choice." Josh scoffed. "Reckless? Are you kidding me? That job was toxic. I was miserable there." "You lasted 3 months," I said, folding my arms. "And last week you posted pictures from a weekend trip on Instagram, with the caption, 'Treat yourself.' That was self-care," Josh shot back, dead serious. "Besides, you make way more than me. You can afford it." That line, "You can afford it," has been the anthem of my life since I got promoted 2 years ago. Every time someone in this family made a poor choice, that was their excuse to rope me into cleaning up the mess. I used to cave because it was easier than dealing with the backlash, but that morning, something about the way Josh said it just hit differently. Mom chimed in then, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Adam, he's your brother. Family takes care of each other. You think we don't remember all the times we paid for your summer camps or drove you to practice?" I bit back a bitter laugh. "Yeah, you also remember the times I had 2 jobs in college just to cover textbooks while Josh was out buying a brand new gaming console with your credit card." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not fair." "No," I said, my tone finally sharpening. "What's not fair is acting like I'm the family bank account. What's not fair is treating me like I'm selfish for wanting to keep the money I earned." Dad's face went red, and I could see the vein in his temple pulsing. "You don't talk to your mother like that. You don't threaten me with being cut off like I'm a teenager. I shot back. You think I'm scared of losing Sunday dinners and Christmas gifts? I have my own life now, my own house, my own bills. And you're standing here acting like I'm the villain because I decided not to bankroll Josh's unemployment vacation. That's when the yelling started. Not even coherent sentences, just everyone talking over each other, each voice climbing higher than the last. My aunt, who had stayed quiet until now, suddenly jumped in about how I was being cold and how family should be above money. Funny how the people yelling about money are always the ones asking for it. I let them go on for a minute, then said, quieter but firmer than I'd spoken all morning. You all had no problem texting me demands last night. Not asking, demanding. Like I don't have a say in how my paycheck gets spent. I'm not doing this anymore. I won't be guilt-tripped into taking care of a grown man who refuses to take care of himself. Josh threw his hands in the air like I had just committed a crime. So you're just gonna watch me get evicted? That's what you want. For me to be homeless. You won't be homeless, I said, meeting his stare. You'll move back in with mom and dad like you always do. Or you'll get another job. Or you'll figure something out. But it won't be me paying for it. He sneered. Wow, you really think you're better than me now, huh? No, I said. I think I'm tired. There was a long pause after that. Mom was the first to break it. If you walk away from us like this, Adam, don't come crying back when you need something. You'll regret this. That one actually stung, not because I needed anything from them, but because of how quick she was to weaponize that kind of threat. It was like years of subtle favoritism and quiet resentment were all boiling over right there in my living room. They eventually left, but not before Dad said, "We'll talk later. This isn't over." I stood in the quiet house for a while after they were gone, trying to steady my breathing. I should have felt triumphant. I'd finally stood up for myself. But instead I felt this weird mix of anger and sadness, like I had just set fire to a bridge I spent years trying to keep from collapsing. The calls and texts didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. By noon, Josh had posted a passive-aggressive rant on social media about certain people who only care about money. My phone blew up with mutual friends asking what was going on. By dinner time, Mom had left me a voicemail crying about how she never raised me to be this cold. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Because if I knew anything about my family, it was that they didn't take losing control well. And I was about to find out just how far they'd go to try to get it back. The next few days were a blur of awkward phone calls and half-baked apologies from extended relatives who didn't even have the full story. I could tell from the way they worded things. Maybe you should just help him this one time. It's not worth losing your family over money. That mom and dad had already spun the situation into their preferred version. According to them, I was being cruel and abandoning my little brother in his time of need. I tried to ignore it. I went to work, kept my head down, and focused on my own life. But the tension was building in the background like a low drumbeat, and I could feel it every time my phone buzzed. Then Friday night happened. I came home from work later than usual, exhausted, and noticed something strange. The porch light was on, but the house felt wrong somehow. Too quiet, too still. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my stomach dropped. The living room looked like someone had been rifling through my mail. Envelopes were out of order. A drawer had been left half open. I felt a jolt of panic and immediately checked the small safe I keep tucked away in my office closet. The safe was still there, but the combination dial was slightly turned, like someone had tried to guess it. My first thought was burglary. But nothing was missing. Not the TV, not the laptop, not the watch I keep on my dresser. Then I noticed my home office computer had been turned on. I always shut it down completely when I leave for work. I checked the browser history and my pulse spiked. Someone had logged into my joint account portal, the same one I had drained earlier in the week, and attempted multiple transfers. All were blocked because I had changed the password and set up two-factor authentication. I didn't even have to guess who it was. There were too many coincidences. The timing, the fact that only my family knew where that account existed, the lack of any real theft beyond snooping. I called Dad, my voice shaking. "Were you at my house?" He didn't even sound guilty. "We stopped by to talk." "You what?" "You wouldn't answer the phone." He said like that justified everything. "We just wanted to see if we could work this out. You didn't leave us any choice." "You went through my mail." I snapped. "You weren't listening to reason." I could hear Mom in the background saying something about how I'd forced their hand. My chest felt tight. like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "This isn't just crossing a line," I said, my voice low. "This is breaking into my house." Dad scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. We still have a key. This is our family. We're not strangers." That's when it hit me. They genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what they had done. To them, my boundaries weren't real. My house wasn't really mine. My money wasn't really mine. And my privacy was just an obstacle to be pushed aside if I didn't comply fast enough. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Over the next 24 hours, things escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. I woke up Saturday morning to find my credit card frozen, my personal card, not a shared one. When I called the bank, they told me someone had reported suspicious activity on my account. I hadn't reported anything. Then came the email from HR. Apparently, my mother had called my workplace, actually called, to express concern about my unstable behavior and asked if they had an employee assistance program because Adam isn't himself lately. I sat there staring at my monitor in shock. I could practically hear the humiliation burning in my ears. She had tried to make me look unstable at my own job. By noon, I had gotten word from a cousin that there was now a whole narrative floating around the family group chat. I had lost it and was punishing everyone because I was jealous of Josh's freedom. Jealous of a man who had just quit his job and expected me to foot the bill. That was the moment the anger finally pushed past the sadness. Up until then, part of me had been hoping things would cool down, that we'd all take a few days to breathe and then maybe sit down like adults to work through it. But there was no coming back from this. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had actively tried to sabotage my finances, my reputation, even my job. I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the safe, at the stacks of documents I'd kept organized over the years. Bank statements, legal paperwork, copies of everything that mattered. My mind was spinning, not just with anger, but with cold, focused calculation. If they wanted to turn this into war, fine. I could play that game too. That weekend was one of the loneliest I've ever had. I didn't go out, didn't answer calls, didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat there in my house that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a fortress under siege. Every creak of the floorboards made me wonder if someone had used the spare key again. By Sunday night, I'd changed the locks. Doing it felt like betrayal in reverse, like I was cutting the final cord that tethered me to the family I grew up with. I stared at the shiny new keys in my hand afterward, my chest tight. It should have felt empowering. Instead, I felt like I'd lost something I couldn't name. Monday morning at work, I was distracted and irritable. My manager, who thankfully trusts me, asked if everything was okay. I almost broke down right there in his office, but managed to keep it together. It hit me just how far my family had pushed me. I was afraid that even mentioning them would make me look like I was falling apart. The HR email still gnawed at me. I'd reread it 3 times that morning, each time feeling that same mix of humiliation and disbelief. My mom had called my job. She had taken a private family dispute and dragged it into my professional life, risking my reputation. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen, my dinner untouched, just thinking. I thought about the years I spent covering for Josh, paying his speeding ticket when he forgot to show up to court, lending him money for rent, only to find out later he spent it on concert tickets, giving him gas money the week after he bought a brand new gaming chair. I thought about how every family gathering had some version of the same script. Josh would complain about being broke. Mom would sigh about how hard life is for the younger generation, and all eyes would slowly turn toward me. If I hesitated even for a moment, Dad would chime in with a lecture about sharing what you have and how family helps family. And I thought about how no one, not once, had ever done that for me. When I was 23 and barely making rent after my old car broke down, I slept on a friend's couch for 3 months because Mom said they couldn't spare the space, while Josh still had the biggest bedroom in the house. When I scraped together my first down payment, they mocked me for buying in the wrong neighborhood, instead of congratulating me. The memories piled up until it felt like a weight on my chest. That was my rock bottom, not the yelling, not the break-in, not even the credit card freeze. It was the quiet realization that my family would never see me as anything but their safety net, and that if I didn't make a change now, I'd still be sitting in this same kitchen 5 years from now, taking calls from Josh about how he'd quit yet another job and needed me to swoop in and save him. Something shifted in me that night. I opened my laptop and started making lists. First, practical things. bank accounts, passwords, who had keys to the house. Then, bigger things, people I could trust outside the family, steps I could take to make sure no one could mess with my finances again. I called my bank first thing Tuesday morning and explained the situation. The representative was sympathetic and helped me put extra security measures on my accounts, voice verification, new PINs, and alerts for every login attempt. Then I took the spare key off the ring I'd had since college and threw it in the trash. That tiny piece of metal had been symbolic for too long, a reminder that my parents could walk into my life whenever they wanted. Not anymore. Social media was next. I locked down my profiles, removed half my extended relatives from my friends list, and turned off tagging. If they wanted to keep gossiping, they could do it without access to my personal life. Despite all these steps, the sadness lingered. I'd sit at work and catch myself staring at nothing, wondering if I'd gone too far, wondering if maybe I was the problem. That's the thing about family. They know exactly how to plant seeds of doubt, and those seeds don't die easily. One night that week, Josh texted me for the first time since the blow-up. His message was simple: "Hope you're happy. I might be out on the street next week." No apology. No acknowledgement of what he or the others had done. Just another guilt trip. I didn't respond. Instead, I went back to my lists. I started a new one, a private document titled Next Steps. I wrote down every incident from the past week: the break-in, the attempted transfers, the call to HR. I added dates, times, even screenshots of texts and voicemails. Not because I was planning anything specific yet, but because I wanted a record. If they were going to keep pushing me, I wanted to be ready. And deep down, I knew they would push again. People like Josh, and, honestly, people like my parents, don't just give up control quietly. They escalate. I didn't know exactly what my move would be yet, but I could feel something taking shape in the back of my mind. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to make sure they never had this kind of power over me again. The weeks that followed felt like stepping out of a storm into clear air for the first time. The silence was strange at first. No more constant texts demanding explanations, no barrage of missed calls. Just me, my work, and the space to breathe. At work, I threw myself into my projects, partly as distraction, partly because I had something to prove, to myself, not to them. I stayed late, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. And something incredible happened. I started getting noticed. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon after a big client presentation and said, "You've been on fire lately. Keep this up, and we'll be talking promotions soon." For the first time in months, I smiled without feeling guilty about it. Meanwhile, I kept quietly shoring up my personal life. I met with a financial advisor who helped me move more of my assets into accounts only I could access. We discussed long-term plans, investments, property, even retirement savings. For once, I felt like I was building something secure that no one else could just reach into and take. I also got practical about protecting myself legally. I spoke with a lawyer about what had happened. Not to sue, not yet, but to understand my options if the situation escalated. He told me that the break-in, even with a key, could be considered unlawful entry now that I had revoked permission, especially paired with the attempted financial access. He suggested documenting everything thoroughly, which I had already started doing. That conversation lit a spark in me. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming control. I started working out again, something I hadn't done consistently since college. At first it was just running, then lifting weights in my garage. I didn't realize how much tension I'd been carrying until I felt it start to melt away. The exercise helped me sleep better, which helped me focus more, which made me even sharper at work. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months. People I'd pulled away from because I was too busy playing firefighter for my family's crises. They were surprised to hear from me, but welcoming. One Saturday night, I went out for dinner with an old friend and caught myself laughing. Really laughing, for the first time since this whole thing began. But the real turning point came 2 months after the initial blow-up, when my manager called me into his office with a grin. "You've been killing it, Adam. We'd like to promote you to senior analyst. Bigger clients, bigger bonus." And he added with a raised eyebrow, "A very nice pay bump." Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the quiet, dutiful pride of doing the right thing, but the fierce kind. The kind that comes from knowing you built something yourself and no one else can claim it. That night, I sat down with my next steps document again. I reread everything I'd written about the break-in, the financial sabotage, the HR call. I added a new section, goals. Not revenge, not yet. Just goals. Secure financial independence, done. Get promoted, done. Strengthen personal network, in progress. Prepare for escalation, ongoing. Because even though I hadn't heard much from them lately, I knew my family. Silence wasn't peace, it was a lull. Sure enough, Josh broke the quiet a few days later with a text that read, "Hope you're enjoying your little power trip. Mom says you'll come around eventually. You always do." I stared at the message for a long time, then put my phone down and didn't reply. But this time, instead of feeling hurt or guilty, I felt ready. Ready for the next time they tried to push me. Ready to hold my ground. Ready, if I had to push back harder than I ever had before. In the meantime, I kept building. I refinanced my mortgage to a lower rate, freeing up more cash each month. I opened a small investment account just for future projects, a freedom fund. I called it because it represented exactly that. I even took a short trip for myself, just a weekend getaway to the coast, nothing fancy, but it felt symbolic. For once, I wasn't spending money to fix someone else's mess. I was spending it to enjoy my own life. It was during that trip that the final piece clicked into place. Sitting on a quiet pier at sunset, my phone in my hand, I scrolled back through the messages, the threats, the guilt trips, the manipulation, and it hit me. This wasn't just about Josh's rent anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about control. They had lost their grip on me, and they hated it. And that meant they were going to try to get it back. I closed my phone and looked out at the water, the calm waves reflecting the last bit of daylight. If they wanted a war, I was going to make sure I had every advantage before the first shot was fired. The first rail opening came in the most unexpected way, an email. It was from an old mutual friend, Mark, who used to hang around Josh back when we were teenagers. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he'd seen one of Josh's vague social media posts about how I had abandoned the family and felt the need to reach out. "Look," the email began, "I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but you should probably know Josh has been bragging about some stuff he shouldn't. Apparently, he took out a personal loan last year in your dad's name, forged his signature, and now he's panicking because the payments are overdue." I read the email 3 times, my heart pounding. If this was true, Josh hadn't just been irresponsible, he'd committed fraud. And if the bank came knocking, guess who Dad would call first to fix it? But now I had knowledge, and knowledge, I realized, was leverage. I didn't confront anyone right away. Instead, I started quietly gathering information. I pulled my own credit report and Dad's. He'd given me permission once years ago and never revoked it, so technically I still had access through a monitoring service we both used. Sure enough, there it was, a personal loan taken out 18 months ago, delinquent by 2 months, with Dad's name on it. I could already picture the scenario they had probably planned. Josh would cry about how he had no choice. Dad would be furious, but secretly relieved it hadn't gone to collections yet. And they'd all corner me at the next family gathering to demand I be the bigger person and pay it off. Not this time. I called the bank instead and explained who I was. I asked hypothetically what would happen if the primary borrower disputed the loan on grounds of forgery. The representative told me they'd open an investigation and, if fraud was proven, the debt would be removed from the borrower's credit history, and the fraudster could face legal consequences. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote everything down. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and started sketching out a plan. This wasn't about revenge yet, not fully. It was about putting myself in a position where their usual tactics wouldn't work anymore. Step 1. Make sure I could withstand whatever storm came next. Step 2. Collect every piece of evidence that could protect me or hurt them if they pushed too far. Step 3. Wait. Patience was key. I started keeping a dedicated folder, both physical and digital, with every text, voicemail, and email related to this whole fiasco. I even saved screenshots of Josh's passive-aggressive posts. It felt obsessive at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was building a safety net of my own. Meanwhile, life kept getting better on my end. The promotion came through officially, along with the pay bump, and I celebrated quietly with a nice dinner and a bottle of wine. My friends noticed how much lighter I seemed. "You look calmer," one of them said over drinks. "I am," I said, and it was true. For the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for the next family emergency to blow up my plans. Of course, the universe has a way of testing you when you say things like that. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my aunt, the same one who had scolded me during the first confrontation. She sounded nervous, which was unusual for her. "Adam," she said, "I thought you should know. Your parents are planning to have a family meeting next weekend. They're saying they'll set things straight." I asked where, and she told me it was at their house. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there for a while. This was it. The next big push. I could already imagine the scene. Mom crying, Dad shouting, Josh playing the victim. Maybe they'd even invite a few other relatives to gang up on me. The old me would have gone in defensive, scrambling to justify myself, maybe even giving in just to make the noise stop. But the man I had become over the last few months wasn't going there unarmed. I spent the next few days preparing. I printed out copies of my financial statements showing I had already pulled out of the joint accounts legally. I printed the credit report with the fraudulent loan circled in red ink. I gathered the screenshots, the timestamps, even the HR email as proof of how far they'd gone. Then I took one last step. I transferred a chunk of my savings into a trust in my own name, making it harder for anyone to claim I was holding out on them. It felt almost ceremonial, like I was locking the final gate around my life. By the time Saturday rolled around, I wasn't just ready. I was steady. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I could see cars lined up, Josh's, my uncle's, even my grandmother's. They weren't just planning a talk. They were staging an intervention. I took a deep breath, grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, and walked up the path feeling strangely calm. Whatever happened next, I was no longer the scared, guilt-ridden older brother they could bully into compliance. This time, they were going to hear me, whether they liked it or not. The driveway felt like a stage as I stepped out of my car. Through the living room window, I could see silhouettes moving, Josh pacing, Dad standing with his arms crossed. The last time I'd walked into this house, I'd left feeling like the villain. This time, my hands weren't shaking. When I opened the door, everyone turned to look at me. The room was arranged almost theatrically. Chairs pulled into a circle, Mom sitting near the center with a box of tissues already in her lap. "Adam," Dad said, his voice heavy with authority. "Sit down. We need to talk." I stayed standing for a moment, letting the silence stretch, then calmly set my folder on the coffee table and sat. Josh started first, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Nice of you to finally show up. We've been trying to get through to you for months." "You mean trying to wear me down?" I said evenly. Mom jumped in quickly, like she wanted to control the narrative before it got away from her. "Sweetheart, we just want to put this ugliness behind us. Josh has been going through a hard time." I held up a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. "Before we start, I want to be very clear. I'm here to listen and to say my piece. But I will not be shouted at, guilt-tripped, or manipulated. If that starts happening, I leave." "Understood." That set the tone. They didn't like it. I could see Dad bristle, but no one objected. Josh rolled his eyes. "Fine. Here's the deal. I'm behind on rent. 2 months. If I get evicted, it's on you." I raised an eyebrow. "On me? You could have helped," he shot back. "Instead, you made this worse by cutting us off." I didn't argue. Instead, I opened the folder and slid a piece of paper across the table. "That's your loan. The one you took out in Dad's name without telling him." The room went still. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the paper, then at Josh. "What is this?" Josh went pale. That's not. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice calm, almost clinical. "A personal loan. Overdue. Taken out with Dad's signature. Except Dad never signed for it." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Josh, tell me this isn't true." Josh stammered, but I didn't let him spiral into excuses. I placed a second paper on the table, the notes from my call with the bank. "Here's what happens if Dad disputes the loan. The debt is erased from his credit, and the bank opens a fraud investigation. Which means you, Josh, could be facing legal consequences." All the color drained from his face. I leaned back, letting the weight of my words sink in. "So before you lecture me about family loyalty, remember, I have been covering for you for years. This is not my mess to clean up. Not anymore." Dad was still staring at the papers, jaw clenched. For once, the lecture wasn't directed at me. Mom tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "Adam, this isn't the time to be cruel." "Cruel?" I said quietly. "Cruel was breaking into my house. Cruel was freezing my credit card. Cruel was calling my job and telling them I was unstable. I have been patient, Mom. I have been generous. And you turned my boundaries into a game. No one said anything. The silence was louder than the shouting had ever been. I took out the final piece of my folder, a single page summarizing the timeline of everything they'd done since that first text message, the demands, the break-in, the sabotage. I placed it gently on the table. This is my record, I said. If anything like that ever happens again, any harassment, any financial tampering, any calls to my work, this goes to the police and to an attorney. And I will pursue every option available to me. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. Josh slumped back in his chair, muttering something under his breath. Dad stayed silent, staring at the paper like it was a loaded weapon. Mom started to cry softly, but for the first time, the tears didn't sway me. I stood, gathering my folder. You wanted a family meeting. This is my final word. I am done being the scapegoat. I am done being the bank. If Josh wants help, he can start by taking responsibility for what he's done. Until then, my life is no longer on hold for him. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. And just so we're clear, the next time someone walks into my house without my permission, the police will be involved. No warnings. I walked out to my car, the late afternoon sun warm on my face, my heart pounding, but not from fear this time. From relief. Because for the first time, I hadn't just defended myself. I had taken control. The days after that family meeting felt strangely quiet. Not the uneasy quiet of waiting for the next blow, but the kind that comes after a storm has passed. For the first time in months, my phone stayed still. No late-night guilt trips, no surprise calls from relatives trying to mediate. It was almost eerie, but the silence didn't last long. 3 days later, I got a call from Dad. His voice was clipped, like he was chewing on every word before he said it. We talked to the bank, he said flatly. Josh admitted what he did. We closed the loan and filed a fraud report. I sat there on the other end, letting the words sink in. So what happens now? I asked. He has 30 days to start repaying before they take further action, Dad said. And no, before you ask, we are not covering it for him this time. That last line told me everything I needed to know. Something had shifted, not just in me, but in them. The following weekend, I heard through my aunt that Josh had been forced to sell off half his gaming setup and take a job at a local warehouse just to keep up with the payments. He wasn't happy about it. He'd posted a rant online about backstabbing family and fake loyalty, but the tone was different this time. Less smug, more desperate. I didn't respond. Instead, I kept living my life. Work kept getting better. My promotion came with new opportunities. I got to lead a project for a high-profile client, something I'd wanted for years. My manager even hinted at a leadership track for me if I kept performing at this level. I started seeing someone, too, a friend of a friend who was kind, grounded, and had no idea about the family drama. Being with her felt like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't constantly on edge waiting for someone else's problem to land in my lap. One afternoon, Mom finally called. Her voice was softer this time, without the sharp edges. Adam, I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't speak right away. She continued. We shouldn't have gone through your things. Or called your work. Or any of it. We were scared. But that doesn't excuse it. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I appreciate that, I said. But I need you to understand. This isn't about one incident. This is about years of being treated like the safety net. That ends now. I understand, she said quietly. After we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter. It took time, but eventually the family learned that my boundaries weren't just a phase. They stopped asking me for money. They stopped showing up at my house unannounced. When we did see each other, it was on my terms, short, civil, and without the unspoken expectation that I'd solve everyone's problems. Josh still avoids me at gatherings. I don't mind. The last time we were in the same room, I noticed he had a job uniform on. He's still working, still making payments. Maybe, just maybe, he's learning something too. But the real moment of closure came a few months later, when I got a bonus from work, the biggest I'd ever received. I deposited it into my freedom fund, smiled at the growing balance, and realized something. I wasn't just free from their financial grip. I was free, period. I poured myself a glass of wine that night, sat out on the back porch, and looked at the quiet yard. The same house that had once felt like a battleground now felt like a fortress, not because I had locked the world out, but because I had finally claimed it as mine. The last text I ever got from Josh was a simple one. Don't expect me to forgive you. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted the thread and set the phone down. Forgiveness wasn't something I needed from him anymore, because I had already given it to myself. I raised my glass to the quiet night, a small smile tugging at my lips, and said out loud, just to hear it, never again. And for the first time in years, I actually believed it.